Hey guys, tonight's story starts with a man jumping over a flaming barrel, a goat in a tutu, and someone chanting about cheese in Latin. There's no stage, no script, and certainly no audience that knows what's going on, but somehow this is a festival. You're holding a turnip like it's a prize. Someone just dared you to wrestle a pig, and there's a farting competition scheduled at noon. You'd ask questions, but every time you open your mouth, someone hands you another pie. This isn't chaos. This is entertainment. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up because something is licking your face. It smells like garlic and ambition, and when you blink, the first thing you see is a goat wearing what appears to be a flower crown made of turnip tops. The goat sneezes, blinks once, then trots off like it's late for a wedding. You sit up slowly, dirt clinging to your sleeve, a feather stuck behind your ear, and a tambourine already in your hand. You don't know where it came from. No one tells you. Around you, the world is throbbing with color and movement and sounds that may or may not be music. Someone shouts, "Long live the pudding," and everyone cheers. A woman dances past you in a dress made of stitched-together onion skins, and a child runs after her, holding what might be a ladle, a sword, or both. A man leaps over a flaming barrel with all the grace of a frightened deer, lands on his feet, and immediately starts quoting poetry at a duck. The duck appears unimpressed. Someone shoves a warm object into your other hand. It's a mushroom pie. It's oozing something beige and earnest. The man who gave it to you nods solemnly like he's just entrusted you with a royal secret, then somersaults backward into a pile of hay and disappears. You take a bite because what else are you supposed to do, and it tastes faintly of thyme and something that might be hope or soap. There's a stage, though calling it that is generous. It's really just 3 wobbly planks on 2 barrels, and atop it stands a woman with a tambourine twice the size of her head. She slams it against her hip. With such commitment, you're briefly concerned for her bones. "Sing if you're confused," she cries. Everyone starts singing, loudly, off-key, some in Latin. A nearby man joins in while balancing a jug of ale on his forehead. The jug wobbles, he triumphantly falls. You try to ask someone what's going on. A baker's boy, possibly 12 and definitely sticky, shrugs and says, "Festival." You ask what kind. He considers this for a moment, then whispers, "All of them," before vanishing into the crowd like a pastry-fueled ghost. You are left with more questions than answers and a smear of jam on your sleeve. A procession forms. At the front, a pig painted gold struts like it owns property. Behind it, a row of women in cloaks made entirely of cabbage leaves chant something rhythmic, possibly threatening. They are followed by 3 men wearing boots on their hands and nothing else of note. One of them appears to be weeping. It's unclear whether it's joy, pain, or interpretive art. Someone yells, "Begin the circle," and immediately the crowd compresses like dough under a rolling pin. You are pulled into the center by a girl with daisies in her hair and absolutely no sense of personal space. She spins you once, twice, then hands you a fish wrapped in ribbon and disappears. The fish stares at you, judgmental. You offer it the pie. It declines. A horn sounds. It's not a proper horn. It's just a man making a noise into a hollow gourd, but the effect is the same. Everyone gasps dramatically and turns toward the central square where a woman is balancing on 1 foot atop a barrel, juggling eggs and shouting something about destiny. You don't catch all the words, but you're pretty sure it ends in, "Blessed be the custard." Someone near you crosses themselves. The tambourine in your hand shakes involuntarily. You realize you're dancing, not on purpose, but because everyone else is, and the only way to survive the rhythm is to join it. A man skips past you wearing nothing but a belt and a smile, singing a ballad about potatoes. You're not sure what the melody is, but your feet tap along anyway. At some point, a chicken lands on your shoulder. It doesn't seem afraid. It settles there like a second hat and watches the chaos with practiced boredom. You begin to wonder if it's irregular. Near the well, someone lights a small fire and declares it the beginning of the sacred pudding games. Everyone claps. You clap too, though you still don't know the rules. A boy hands you a wooden spoon and says, "Don't let it touch the ground, or she wakes up." He points to a loaf of bread wearing a bonnet. You nod like this makes sense. The sun rises slowly, confused but compliant. Somewhere, a cow moos in solidarity. A bell rings, not because it's time for anything, but because someone found it in the mud and decided it deserved a moment. You are now part of something. You don't know what, and honestly, it's best you don't ask. Because the goat is back, and it's brought friends, and someone just yelled, "Pie joust at dawn," and you have the sinking feeling you're expected to participate. You tighten your grip on the tambourine. The pie is gone. The chicken is still watching. And in the middle of this riot of confusion and celebration, you do the only reasonable thing left. You dance. You're not sure when the ribbon got tied around your waist, but it's there now, tugging gently, then violently, then rhythmically in the way only something vaguely festive and deeply dangerous can. Someone pushes you forward with the kind of encouragement that usually precedes disaster, and suddenly you're moving in a circle with 20 other people who all look equally confused and equally committed. The pole in the center wobbles ominously, like it's seen some things and would prefer not to see any more. The ribbons stretch from the top like colorful tentacles of intention, each one clutched by a villager too enthusiastic to ask questions. A girl with a tambourine in her teeth passes you clockwise. A boy with no shoes and one eyebrow goes the opposite way. The tension in the air is festive, yes, but also mildly unhinged. A woman in a cloak made entirely of moss raises both arms to the sky and shouts, "For fertility," in a tone that suggests she either wants to bless the land or start a cult, possibly both. She then hugs a goat so aggressively the goat seems to question its life choices and sits down mid-hug out of protest. No one intervenes. You wonder, briefly, whether the goat volunteered for this. The circle tightens. The pole shakes. You can't stop moving or you'll get trampled, tangled, or declared the chosen one, which feels like a lot of pressure for someone who still doesn't know what the occasion is. A child trips, rolls twice, and pops back up shouting, "I'm a seed." The crowd erupts in applause. You have no idea what the criteria for success are, but apparently enthusiasm counts for something. The music isn't music exactly. It's more like 5 instruments that have never met trying to hold a conversation. A fiddle screeches somewhere near your left ear, joined by a drum that has clearly given up on rhythm and now just exists to be loud. A man blows into a horn that turns out to be a hollowed-out root vegetable. You make eye contact with him. He winks. You try to ask the person nearest you what this is all for, but she's too busy shouting, braid it," while flailing her ribbon like it's a snake she's trying to charm. The ribbons twist around each other, bright and chaotic, forming a pattern that looks less like weaving and more like panic caught in midair. A rooster hops into the circle, flaps once, and struts off as if to say, "Not today." Someone offers it a biscuit. It declines. The ground under your feet is soft, trampled, and vaguely sticky. It smells like crushed flowers, mead, and ambition. The pole sways again. You don't feel safe. You don't feel unsafe. You just feel deeply involved in something that probably doesn't have an exit strategy. A man with a beard braided into the shape of a question mark shouts, "Reverse!" And suddenly everyone is spinning the other way. Your feet betray you. You stumble. A girl catches your elbow and mutters, "We lost 3 dancers last year. You'll be fine." She smiles sweetly and disappears behind a curtain of linen that you swear wasn't there a moment ago. The pole groans. A ribbon snaps. Someone screams, "She's been chosen!" And everyone cheers. A potato is thrown. It misses its mark and lands in a bucket of ale, which is immediately declared a blessing. The bucket is then carried off by 3 very serious men in robes who appear to be improvising a chant. You consider escaping, but realize you're now double knotted to a man who claims to be a seasonal prophet. He smells like mint and wet wood. He tells you the sun is watching. You nod. It seems polite. A whistle blows. Or maybe it's just a kettle. Either way, the tempo increases. Feet stomp harder. Hands grip tighter. The pole is leaning, definitely leaning. But the crowd has reached a state of frenzy that could power a small windmill, so no one stops. You're sweating. Everyone's sweating. The goat is now lying down with its hooves over its eyes. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stops. A hush falls over the circle. Everyone freezes mid-step, ribbons tangled like medieval spaghetti, breath held like they're waiting for judgment. The pole stands miraculously, and the moss woman nods solemnly. The land is pleased, she announces. Everyone claps. You clap. The goat doesn't. It might be asleep, or disassociating. You are unceremoniously unwrapped from your ribbon by a boy who is also wrapped in 3 other ribbons and may not actually be part of the event. He hands you a flower. It's wilted. He bows anyway. Someone starts singing. A new circle begins to form. You look down at your hands. One still holds the flower. The other now holds a cup of something steaming and suspicious. You drink it. You spin. There is yelling. Not dramatic, end-of-the-world yelling, but the specific kind of yelling that happens when several dozen people believe they understand a game no one has ever actually explained. You are standing in a ring of spectators who all smell like onions and disappointment, and someone has just shoved a very large, very firm turnip into your hands. It's heavier than it looks. It pulses with history. Don't think about it, says a man with no eyebrows and a sash that reads, Champion 3 years running. He slaps your back hard enough to reset your spine. Just hurl it like vengeance. You want to ask what that means, but another voice immediately shouts, no wrists, no elbows, no brain, which is apparently some kind of slogan, because everyone cheers. The field ahead of you is a patchy stretch of mud, straw, and hopes gone stale. At the far end is a crude target drawn in chalk on a barn wall. It's not centered, it's not level, and it's absolutely been hit before, possibly with a horse. A group of robed elders stand near it, nodding thoughtfully at each toss like they're judging Olympic javelin throws, but one of them is clearly asleep, and another is just drawing tiny ducks in the dirt with a stick. A girl in a hooded cloak steps forward before you. She swings the turnip over her head in a wide arc, spins once, then yeets it so violently that her shoe comes off. The turnip flies beautifully, gloriously, and then lands in a puddle with a noise that suggests it now identifies as soup. The crowd roars. She's carried off like royalty. You are handed a cup of something warm and untrustworthy, then pushed forward with the urgency of a village trying not to explode. You approach the throwing line, which is just a suspiciously flattened strip of earth surrounded by betting children and one goat wearing a monocle. Someone starts a chant. You can't tell if they're rooting for you or just bored, but it's loud and rhythmic and contains the phrase, Spud Slinger, which may now be your name. You adjust your grip. The turnip is cold, damp, and oddly comforting. You've never thrown a root vegetable for distance, not professionally, but your body moves like it remembers something primal. You wind up, you hurl. It arcs. It does not arc well. It sails left, then veers right, then clips a bucket balanced on top of a fence and explodes into a flock of startled pigeons. A man screams not in pain but in admiration. A ricochet shot, bold. The goat bleats once and appears mildly impressed. The judges confer. One of them holds up a sign with a drawing of what might be a turnip or a disappointed frog. It's unclear. A nearby woman records your name on a scroll that also has gravy on it. You are told to stand with the others. You do not know who the others are. but they all look like they've seen things and now keep their turnips in locked boxes. The next contestant is a boy no older than 8 who wears a helmet made of bread and insists on being called Sir Hurl a lot. His throw is elegant, poetic, and ends with a backflip that is neither requested nor required. The crowd loses its mind. You clap. You hate that you clap, but you do. He bows. A tooth falls out. More throws happen. Some spin, some bounce. One catches fire mid-air, and no one asks how. Blood is drawn at one point, not from the turnips, but from an old man who tripped over his own excitement and declared it an omen. He's fine. The blood is used to christen a new trophy. The trophy is a ladle nailed to a plank. Eventually, a bell rings. Or maybe someone just struck a gong with a fish. Either way, silence falls. The judges announce the top 3 throws with dramatic flair and a song that might be improvised. Your name is not called. The winner is a woman who didn't actually throw anything but yelled, "Turnip," so convincingly that no one noticed. She is crowned with a wreath made of radishes and asked to give a speech. She says, "Thank you, I do this for the soil," and bursts into tears. The crowd applauds. As people begin to scatter and the field reverts to chaos, someone hands you a second turnip and says, "Rematch at dusk, this time underhand." You nod solemnly, tucking the vegetable under your arm like a newborn promise. You have no idea what you're doing, but you've never felt more alive. The troop arrives just before lunch, which no one notices because a man is standing on a barrel shouting, "Behold," while balancing an eel on his forehead. The eel looks bored. The crowd is not. Children scream. Adults cheer. A goose honks in what may be admiration or existential dread. You're handed a boiled egg and told to hold it tightly. You do, though no one explains why. There's a juggler first. She enters with a flourish and a bow, dressed in mismatched shoes and a hat that seems to be hiding a secret. Her hands are fast, too fast, a blur of motion and brightly colored produce. She juggles apples, then knives, then something that looks suspiciously like a live squirrel. She grins, revealing a gold tooth and exactly one eyebrow. You notice she's missing a finger. You do not ask why. She doesn't seem to miss it. She tosses a turnip skyward, spins, catches it behind her back, and then casually bites into it like it's applause-flavored. The crowd roars. She curtsies deeply, narrowly avoids falling off the barrel, and vanishes into the smoke produced by the next act, lighting something he shouldn't. The fire eater arrives in a puff of mead-scented confidence. He's wearing a red sash, no shirt, and a smile that suggests he has never once read a warning label. He carries 3 torches, one of which is already on fire, and the other 2 of which are debating it. He bows dramatically and hiccups. You're fairly certain that's not part of the show. He lights all 3 torches, swings them around his head, and inhales so deeply the wind changes direction. Then he breathes in a column of fire, swallows it, and lets out a long, slow exhale that smells vaguely like roasted onions. The audience gasps. The goat next to you faints. The fire eater bows again, sets his sleeve alight by accident, and extinguishes it with a flourish so smooth you wonder if it was scripted. He finishes by tossing the torches over his shoulder and shouting, "Who needs eyebrows anyway?" as the crowd erupts into whistles and stomping. And then there's the man with the paper. He doesn't announce himself. He simply appears, walking calmly to the center of the square, like a man with a very specific agenda and a complete lack of self-preservation. He holds up a scroll. It's yellowed, crinkled, possibly cursed. "This," he says in a voice that sounds like gravel being politely ground, "is parchment from the archives of sin." He winks at a child. The child drops their candy. With great ceremony, he tears the scroll in half, bows to the east, kisses the parchment, and begins to eat it. Slowly, chewing, deliberately, making eye contact with no one and yet somehow everyone. The crowd is silent. Someone coughs. A pigeon lands on his shoulder and then immediately takes off again, visibly disturbed. You don't know what flavor parchment is, but you suspect it pairs well with unresolved trauma. He finishes one sheet, pulls another from inside his cloak, and begins again. You wonder how many pages he has. You wonder what sins they contain. You wonder, briefly, if this is performance or penance. Someone starts clapping. A woman near the front swoons. A man yells, "Encore," and throws him a receipt. He eats that too. It's unclear whether he has standards. The act ends not with a bow, but with a quiet belch and a whispered, "May your secrets stay crunchy." Then he walks off into the mist like a medieval fever dream, leaving behind nothing but crumbs and confusion. You find yourself clapping. Everyone is clapping. You don't know why. Maybe it's awe. Maybe it's concern. Maybe it's just peer pressure dressed in bells and mystery. The troupe takes a collective bow. A tambourine is thrown. A child catches it and immediately declares themselves king of jugglers. No one disagrees. The juggler throws her remaining apple into the air, catches it behind her knee, and exits laughing. A man next to you leans in and says, "That's nothing. Wait until the mime arrives." You don't know what that means. You're not sure you want to. But your hands are still clapping, and your egg is still warm. And somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint, papery crunch of someone preparing an encore. You don't mean to wander into the punishment square. You're following the smell of something frying in questionable oil when the crowd parts like soup around a ladle, and suddenly you're standing in front of a man strapped into a wooden stock with a chicken on his head and a smile on his face. The chicken is asleep. The man is not. There are 6 stocks in a row, all occupied, not by thieves or heretics or whatever else you'd expect, but by locals who appear to have signed up for this willingly. One of them is holding a sign that says, "Tell me I'm a disappointment," while another just screams compliments at passers-by. A woman in purple waves enthusiastically as she's pelted with overripe pears, shouting, "Tithes for aim." You step back instinctively, unsure of the social contract here, and that's when you lock eyes with him. The man in the cabbage costume. His face is serious, his eyes intense. His arms are full of leafy green menace, and before you can look away, he's already walking toward you with purpose and a very limp carrot. "You," he bellows, "you look like someone who's never repented for their salad sins." You try to explain that you're just here for the fried bread, but it's too late. A crowd gathers. Someone hands you a burlap sack labeled "shame." A child starts drumming. A goat bleats like it's been waiting for this moment all week. The cabbage man points dramatically to the center of the square where a tiny stage has appeared, possibly summoned by chaos or municipal funding. You're nudged forward, reluctantly heroic. The sketch begins. It's called "The Sins of Lettuce," and apparently it's a one-act moral tragedy starring you, cabbage man, and 2 people pretending to be croutons. There is a script, though no one follows it. You're accused of dressing greens without consent, of beheading romaine, of abandoning kale when it got weird. Someone in the audience yells, "Let us pray," and the crowd howls. Cabbage man circles you, flinging actual cabbage leaves into the air with the solemnity of a priest at a particularly rustic funeral. You try to play along, but he gives you a wooden spoon and tells you to atone by stirring the bowl of reckoning, which turns out to be a wheelbarrow full of wilted spinach and guilt. You stir. People cheer. A jester hands you a garnish. Meanwhile, the stocks remain lively. One man is reciting bad poetry until someone throws a beat at him hard enough to knock his hat off. Another woman is conducting a one-woman courtroom drama where she plays both the criminal and the overworked judge. The jury is a cluster of geese who seem deeply unimpressed. You're pulled from the salad sketch just in time to avoid being declared the Thousand Island heretic. Someone slaps a sticker on your chest that reads, "Caesar's, betrayer," and the crowd breaks into applause like they've just watched a very satisfying execution, minus the death and plus a lot of puns. You try to retreat to the edge of the square, but the energy is contagious. A boy no older than 7 is being mock-flogged with a feather duster for crimes against porridge. He squeals with laughter. The man doing the flogging is his father, wearing a fake mustache and a magistrate's wig made from old mop strings. Every punishment here is ridiculous, over the top, and, you realize slowly, entirely fabricated. No one is really being punished. They're performing punishment like it's a favorite local play that everyone knows the lines to but still insists on watching again. You lean against a barrel that may or may not be leaking cider and watch as the jester volunteers to be locked into the stocks for being too handsome on a Wednesday. The crowd loses it. Someone throws a radish. He catches it in his teeth. There's a final sketch before lunch, featuring a man dressed as a sinfully smug loaf of bread being publicly sliced by a group of enthusiastic children wielding foam daggers. It ends in a standing ovation and a large crumb explosion. You don't know what it means. You don't need to. Cabbage Man finds you afterward. He pats your shoulder solemnly and says, "You stirred the bowl with honor." Then he hands you a single lettuce leaf folded in half like a note and vanishes into the mist, or possibly just behind a wagon. You unfold the leaf. It's blank. You don't know if that's a message or a prank, but you tuck it into your pocket anyway. It's only midday. The shame stocks are still full. Someone's setting up a pie-throwing booth with targets labeled Tax Collector X and that one rooster. And you suddenly understand that punishment here isn't about guilt. It's about participation. And you're already halfway to signing up for round 2. The cheese looks innocent. Enough. Round. Slightly lopsided. Glossy with confidence. A wheel of dairy serenity sitting at the top of a hill, so steep it feels like nature is playing a prank. You stand next to it, clutching your knees and trying to remember how gravity works, while a man in a vest made of questionable fur explains the rules. "There are no rules," he says, beaming. "Just run, or fall, preferably both." You blink at him. He ties a ribbon around the cheese like it's being married off to fate and screams, 3. Before you've processed the other 2 numbers, the cheese is gone. It launches down the slope with the enthusiasm of a toddler on espresso, bouncing, spinning, and somehow accelerating beyond all logic. The crowd roars. People hurl themselves after it like lemmings with something to prove. You're not sure if you jump or are simply caught in the tidal wave of human ambition, but your feet leave the earth, and then the rest of you follows, very badly. The first thing you hit is the grass. The second is your own foot. Then someone's elbow, a rogue shoe, and possibly a reincarnated saint, based on the whisper of "forgive them" that grazes your ear as you cartwheel sideways into a ditch. The hill is not a hill. It is a betrayal disguised as scenery. It drops faster than your sense of self-preservation, and every time you try to stand, the earth rejects you like a bad suitor. You slide. You tumble. You bounce in ways that bones should not bounce. Somewhere to your left, a man is screaming something about cheddar purity and justice. A woman barrels past you with the elegance of a swan on fire, clutching a flag that simply reads, "For glory." You hit a tuft of grass that might be alive. It catches you gently, like an old friend or a very lazy ambush. You pause long enough to see the cheese wheel still going, still spinning, still absolutely winning. It disappears over a small ridge with a triumphant wobble. The crowd at the bottom erupts. You try to stand. Again, but your knees have filed for independence. So you crawl. You crawl down that hill with the dignity of a wet sock, accompanied by the distant chorus of medieval flutes and one man yelling, "I still love you, dairy." Someone somersaults by, their eyes full of stars and mud. Another participant is lying flat on their back, laughing like they've seen the truth. You lock eyes with them for a moment and understand they've transcended the need for linear motion. At the base of the hill, People are cheering, clapping, offering mugs of something frothy to the wheezing, bruised heroes arriving in heaps. You drag yourself across the final stretch of incline, every muscle in your body shouting in ancient dialects. A child hands you a daisy and tells you that you did great. The daisy is fake. The sentiment is not. You don't win. No one does. The cheese is cradled by an old man in ceremonial robes and suspiciously fast shoes who swears he's just the referee despite being mysteriously clean and unnaturally smug. He lifts the cheese above his head like a newborn god. The crowd bows. You lie in the grass, aching, covered in dirt, and smiling like a lunatic. Someone offers you a biscuit. You don't ask what's in it. Another participant stumbles up next to you, missing one shoe and half a beard, and declares that this has been the best day of his life. You nod, then cough up a small pebble and try not to pass out. Behind you, preparations begin for the uphill version of the race, which you're told involves chasing a pudding that refuses to be caught. A goat is already warming up. And even though every inch of your body is bruised, sore, and full of questions, part of you wants to run again. Because the cheese may always win, but so do the ones who fall after it. The pig is already moving before you've figured out where the rope goes. It rockets past your knees like a bar of soap fired from a cannon, leaving a streak of something shiny and deeply suspicious in its wake. There is a moment of silence, pure, reverent anticipation, and then all hell breaks loose inside the chapel. You're handed the rope by an elderly woman who's wearing a bonnet, a cloak, and the expression of someone who has seen too much and chosen joy anyway. "Aim for the soul," she says, deadpan, and pats your shoulder like you're about to do something noble. You don't know what that means, but she does. The pig definitely does. Someone shouts, "Go!" even though the pig has already taken a lap and possibly committed 2 minor crimes. You take off running, the rope swinging wildly like a weapon you neither chose nor understand. The chapel, once a place of quiet prayer and contemplative whispers, now echoes with the thunder of boots, hooves, and gleeful chaos. A candle stand is knocked over. A hymn book explodes. A child throws a radish in what seems like encouragement. The pig slips between pews like it was born for this. Grease glistens under the stained glass light as it careens off a confessional booth and narrowly avoids being blessed by a swinging censer. You sprint after it, nearly tripping over a monk who's laughing so hard he's dropped his incense and is now fanning himself with a page from Revelations. A group of locals forms a loose net on the far side. Arms wide, legs braced, faith wavering. The pig barrels straight through them like divine punishment in porcine form. One man spins, one falls. One is somehow briefly airborne. You think someone calls it a miracle. You nearly get it at the pulpit. It pauses, just for a second, as if to reflect on its journey, or maybe to mock you. You lunge, arms outstretched, rope ready to lasso something besides your own dignity, and miss. The pig ducks low, takes a sharp left, and sprints up the aisle like a sermon on speed. Behind you, applause. The priest enters then, looking less like a man of God and more like a man at the end of his rope, which is unfortunate because you're still holding yours and now making eye contact. He sighs so hard his candle goes out. "Third time this week," he mutters, sidestepping a fleeing choir boy. They never bless the pig, but they always chase it. Someone in the rafters rings a bell for dramatic effect. No one asks them to. The pig leaps onto the altar. You don't know how. Physics has given up. It slides majestically across the surface, knocking over 2 chalices and a bowl of something ceremonial. You follow, slipping once, catching yourself on a statue of Saint Somebody, and hurling the rope forward with the kind of hope usually reserved for confessions and desperate last calls. It wraps, almost, around one back leg, enough to startle the pig but not stop it. It squeals in betrayal, twists, and does a backflip so impressive that someone yells, 10 points for grace. and the entire chapel bursts into spontaneous applause. You fall, not dramatically, just enough to land on your back and question every decision that led you here, including but not limited to agreeing to hold the rope, wearing boots with no grip, and trusting that pigs couldn't climb stairs. The pig vanishes through a side door someone definitely propped open on purpose. It leaves behind a trail of oil, confusion, and a sense of having won something eternal. You lie there, panting, covered in dust, rope in hand, staring up at a ceiling painted with angels who seem to be laughing very, very quietly. A woman steps over you. She offers you a pickle and says, "You almost had him." You take the pickle. Outside, the pig squeals in triumph. Somewhere inside, a fiddle starts up. The priest finally sits down, and no one, not one person, asks why the pig was in the chapel to begin with. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not the kind that's peaceful or sacred, but the kind that feels like it's watching you, judging you, possibly daring you to blink too loud. A ring of torches flickers around a makeshift stage in the village square. And in the center stands a man dressed in all black, painted from chin to forehead like he lost a bet with a ghost and leaned into it. He is the mime. The crowd is seated, cross-legged on the cobblestones, wrapped in cloaks and anticipation. No one speaks, not even the baby chewing on a turnip. You're handed a small scroll labeled "Participant #4" and shoved gently toward the stage by a woman whose entire personality seems to be elbows. The mime begins. He twitches, he shudders. He throws his arms wide and then curls into himself like he's been personally insulted by the concept of gravity. His face contorts, his body flails. He drops to one knee, then collapses completely, only to rise again like an interpretive phoenix. The entire thing lasts maybe 45 seconds. It is loud and it's quiet, emotionally chaotic, physically confusing. You are then asked what you believe the mime has performed. You clear your throat, unsure if sound is allowed here. A man being robbed? A gasp echoes across the square. It is collective, disappointed. A lute plays one mournful note, uninvited. The woman with the elbows winces. The mime stares at you. Not with his eyes, those remain deadpan and unsettling, but with the full force of his mime aura, which somehow screams betrayal. From the corner of the stage, a rooster crows. It's not a regular crow. It's long, decisive. It sounds like it's declaring something final. The crowd nods solemnly. The rooster has spoken. You are politely but firmly escorted off the stage. A child whispers, "He guessed wrong," as if you've committed a small local crime. Another audience member pats your shoulder and hands you a potato. "Better luck next time," she says, though there is no next time. You've been roostered. A man in a cloak steps up for the next round. The mime resets. This time, he begins with a slow crawl, then mimics carrying something heavy, then appears to be struck down by a force invisible but deeply philosophical. His death scene is dramatic. His resurrection, somehow, even more so. There's a moment where he seems to argue with God, using only his eyebrows. The man guesses, "The Black Plague." The mime bows. Applause erupts. A goat faints. The rooster nods. You don't understand any of it. Another round begins. This time the mime reenacts what looks like a very aggressive bread-making process, then transitions into stomping grapes with the intensity of a war general. By the time he's pretending to drown in an invisible river of wine, you're not sure if this is entertainment or an extremely elaborate therapy session. The guess is the Treaty of Verdun. Somehow that is correct. The rooster flaps its wings in approval. A garland of flowers is thrown. The mime catches it in his teeth without blinking. You sink lower into your spot beside the stage, eating your consolation potato like it holds answers. It doesn't. It tastes like dirt and shame. The mime glances at you once, just once, and it's enough to make you reevaluate your understanding of history, art, and poultry-based governance. Eventually, the final round begins. The mime enters the stage and proceeds to act out something so profound, so chaotic, and so deeply confusing that half the audience looks ready to cry and the other half is taking notes. He crawls, fights, pleads, wails silently, and crumples to the ground in a heap of existential exhaustion. The final contestant stands tall and says, with confidence, "The fall of Rome." The mime stands. So does the crowd. The rooster clucks once and walks away. The night ends, not with words, but with a silent standing ovation. You rise with everyone else, clapping even though the mime can't hear it, or maybe he does, through the ancient language of knees and nods. You don't know, but you leave with one truth. Medieval mime night is not a game. It is a ritual, and you lost. The jester in training introduces himself with a cartwheel and a curtsy so low, it looks like he's searching for something he dropped yesterday. He's wearing bells, stripes, one boot, and a crown made of bread crusts. There's a rat in his pocket. It might be asleep, or decoy meat. Either way, it's wearing a tiny hat. You were trying to buy honey. Instead, you've been cornered by this creature of chaos, who now tosses a dead rat in the air with alarming precision while whispering a sonnet to a cabbage. Not just any cabbage, a particularly dented one, wrapped in lace, with a name, Millicent. He whispers sweet nothings to her like she's the only leafy head in a sea of lettuce, then turns to you with the eyes of someone who's seen too much, and also nothing at all. "You've got the look," he says, pointing a finger that may or may not be smeared in jam. The jester's heart, or spleen, hard to tell. Come, class is starting. And just like that, you're following him through a narrow alley lined with confused ducks and into what appears to be an abandoned barn, except everything inside has been aggressively decorated with ribbons and regret. A chicken wears a monocle. A donkey stands at a podium. A man is painting his foot. This is Fool School. Lesson 1. The jester in training declares, hopping onto a barrel, is balance, both emotional and physical, but mostly physical, because the emotional kind takes longer and we're late for lunch. He straps you into stilts without warning. They are taller than you, older than you, and deeply opposed to logic. A crowd gathers, half students, half spectators, one cat in a cape. You rise slowly, wobbly, like a newborn deer made of bad decisions. The jester claps. "Excellent. Now juggle these." He hands you 3 objects, a spoon, a sock filled with pebbles, and something that looks suspiciously like a roasted beet with googly eyes glued on. You drop all 3 immediately. Someone applauds, anyway. The chicken nods in approval. The donkey sneezes. Lesson 2 begins. You're instructed to insult a tree stump using only interpretive dance. The stump is named Gerald. It is very sensitive. You try a series of hops and arm flails that suggest mild disapproval. Gerald does not seem offended, but the cabbage claps enthusiastically. The jester tells you you're on the cusp of comedic transcendence. A beetle lands on your nose and stays there, possibly out of pity. Then comes theory. The jester sits everyone down and reads from a scroll titled The Philosophy of Fools, Volume 2, The Giggling Abyss. It is 90% nonsense and 10% terrifying accuracy. He explains that the fool's purpose is to say the truth in a way that sounds like madness but lands like prophecy, or sometimes pie. The line is thin, and also usually on fire. You take notes using a stick and a patch of dirt. Your handwriting is shaky, mostly because you're still on stilts, and a goat keeps trying to nibble your kneecap. The jester sees this, declares it a test, and hands you a certificate made of tree bark and hope. "You're ready for the bell test," he whispers, eyes gleaming. "The final trial. You are blindfolded, given 2 bells, told to find the hidden turnip without speaking, stepping on a chicken, or losing your dignity. You immediately step on a chicken. It squawks forgiveness. You crawl through hay, feathers, judgment, and laughter. Somewhere in the chaos, someone starts singing about pickles. The jester weeps with joy. You find the turnip. It's in your sleeve. You don't ask how. Everyone cheers. You are declared honorary half-fool, first class. A child places a daisy chain on your head. The jester hugs you and whispers, "You were always the cabbage." You don't know what it means, but you feel it in your bones. The tavern smells like spilled mead and unresolved tension. The floor sticks to your boots, like it has abandonment issues, and the air is thick with smoke, laughter, and the faint threat of spontaneous accordion. You step inside cautiously, immediately locking eyes with a man who may or may not be arm wrestling a loaf of bread. A voice calls out from the corner, "New blood." You're ushered toward a table made of scars and questionable stains, surrounded by a group of individuals who look like they've been playing this game since the dawn of ale. The leader, a woman wearing 3 hats and no patience, slams down a pair of dice that appear to be carved from bone, teeth, or some combination thereof. "Welcome," she purrs, "to Dice and Lies." You ask about the rules. They tell you, but mid-sentence someone else interrupts to contradict her, then another person interrupts them, and before you know it, 5 people are explaining 6 different versions of the same rule book that may not exist. You nod politely. No one else seems to know what's going on either, which, apparently, is part of the charm. You're handed a mug of something that burns on the way down, and possibly on the way out. The game begins. Your first roll lands on a 7, or a fish. It depends on who you ask. The man across from you insists it's a royal flush and tries to barter you a chicken. You accept. His name is Grimbly. The chicken's name is also Grimbly. You don't ask questions, you just keep rolling. Someone wins a boot. Another person loses their pants. A third claims to have summoned a ghost, and for a moment, everyone stops and stares at the fireplace like it might blink. The game resumes. You start winning. Somehow, the pile in front of you grows to include a jar of pickles, a slightly cracked mirror, 2 buttons that definitely aren't cursed, and a string of dried mushrooms arranged to look like a necklace or a warning. Then the lies begin. Someone claims you cheated. You didn't. Probably. Another player accuses the dice of being haunted. The dice squeak once and go silent. You try to defend yourself, but halfway through your sentence, a new rule is declared. No speaking without rhyming. You fail immediately and must forfeit your Grimbly. The chicken is passed to a bard with a lopsided grin and a lute shaped like despair. He writes a song about your betrayal. It includes dance moves. The crowd claps along. You sip your drink. It now tastes like vengeance and cloves. The bets shift. Someone wagers you'll sneeze. You don't. Another bets the bartender will cry before midnight. He already is. The innkeeper enters the room carrying a tray of steaming stew, and the entire tavern hushes. A coin is tossed. A prediction is made. He sneezes. The room erupts into cheers like the plague has just ended, and everyone's been declared slightly above average. Mugs are raised. Bread is flung. Someone starts a chant that's mostly vowels and ends in interpretive humming. You're dragged into a toast you don't understand, but accidentally initiate a new round by blinking too slowly. A man in the corner bets that the goat by the hearth will blink twice. It does. Someone loses their shirt. Another gains a wife. You consider leaving, but your legs have become philosophical, and the table now considers you furniture. The final round approaches. You're told to roll for truth. The stakes are high, your pride, or a handful of raisins. You roll. The dice land on nothing. Literally nothing. They vanish. The entire table gasps. Someone whispers, "The void." A toast is made in your honor. The game ends. You stumble away from the table with a headache, half a chicken, and 1 fewer sock than you started with. The tavern door creaks as you exit, and someone calls after you. "Same time next week?" You don't answer, but the chicken does. There is a horn involved. Not the musical kind. Not the kind that calls warriors to battle, no. This is a ceremonial horn, carved from something large and previously annoyed. and it is blown to mark the beginning of the most sacred, most competitive, most nasal offense to the senses known as the windy trials. You were trying to find the bakery. Instead, you are now seated between a man fanning himself with a ladle and a woman eating beans like she's in training for something biblical. A child passes you a scorecard. It has categories: volume, duration, artistic flair. There's also a section labeled spiritual resonance, which you decide not to ask about. The judge arrives in silence, draped in cloth so brown it could have been dyed with shame. His hat is tall, his nose is long. His expression is that of someone who's made peace with the horrors of his profession. He takes a seat at a table, lifts a quill, and nods once. The first contestant steps forward. He is barefoot and deeply confident. There is a hush. He bows, he bends, he breathes, and then he releases a note so low, so sustained, so vibrational that the mug in your hand trembles and a nearby donkey falls over. The judge raises an eyebrow. The crowd gasps. The score is a solid 8. Someone throws a garland. It is politely ignored. Next is a man in a cloak that billows unnecessarily. He announces his name is Bartholomew, and that he has been preparing for this moment since the plague. You don't know which plague. You don't ask. He eats an entire onion in 2 bites, chugs a mug of dark ale, then spins in a slow theatrical circle and lets loose with such power that a nearby torch flickers. Halfway through, he burps. Loudly, deliberately. There is silence. Then someone shrieks. Then everyone cheers. The judge writes something on the parchment so fast it tears. Bartholomew bows deeply, winks at you, and sits. You try to breathe through your mouth. A woman follows who claims to channel the spirits of ancient winds. Her performance is gentle, melodic, almost whimsical, like a breeze through haunted curtains. The judge weeps. You begin to suspect you're not hallucinating. Not entirely. Then it's your turn. Your name is called, even though you never gave one. Someone shoves you toward the stage. A stool is waiting. A child hands you a mug of suspicious stew and says, "For fuel." You stare out at the expectant crowd. There are dozens of them. Farmers, bakers, a knight polishing his armor with what looks like a sock. All of them waiting to hear what you have to offer, what you have within. You sit. You try. What emerges is not impressive. It is not powerful. It is not art. It is polite. Like an apology wrapped in embarrassment. A soft little note that escapes you and then immediately wishes it hadn't. A sympathy fart. The judge sighs. The crowd claps anyway, though gently, like they're unsure whether to encourage or just let you wander off into the hills. You take your place in the lineup, next to a man who smells like fear and porridge. He pats your back. "It happens to the best of us," he says, and then adds, "and also to you." The competition continues. A teenager uses a jug as an amplifier. A woman dressed like a nun emits a sound that causes 3 birds to fall from the sky. One man's performance is so silent and sinister that the judge writes down a score without speaking and then leaves the parchment to smolder gently. At the end, a winner is declared. It is, of course, Bartholomew. He is crowned with a wreath of leeks and reverence. The crowd lifts him up like a champion of air. He toots one final time in celebration. A sheep faints. You walk away slowly, dignity in fragments, lungs confused, ears ringing, and yet part of you understands. Not the logic, not the physics, not the scorecard, but the joy, the terrible, trumpet-shaped joy. The stage is a wagon, the audience is drunk, and the rules are unclear. You don't know how you got signed up for this, but there's a feather stuck to your sleeve and a suspicious amount of hay in your shoes, so either you volunteered or someone volunteered you without your knowledge. A bell rings, or someone sneezes. Either way, the mimicry contest has begun. First up is a man in a tunic so tight you can see his thoughts. He declares himself Sir Hooves a Lot, and neighs with such determination that a nearby horse looks over like, "Excuse me?" The audience bursts into applause. He bows. The horse bows. The man falls off the wagon. No one helps him up. Next, a woman with the energy of 3 raccoons stands and lets out a honk that rattles the shutters. It is pure goose, the kind of honk that implies tax fraud and territorial rage. The audience gasps. A man drops his tankard. Somewhere, a child cries. The woman honks again, this time while flapping her cloak with such fury that it becomes weather. Then comes the frog. Not a person pretending to be a frog, a person who somehow, without warning or transition, becomes one. He squats, he croaks, he leaps into the air with knees that defy God and lands in a puddle no one remembers being there. The crowd loses its mind. A judge openly weeps. Someone throws a lily pad onto the stage. The frog bows by blinking. It is your turn. The crowd hushes. Someone whispers, "What'll it be?" Like you're about to perform a dark ritual instead of barnyard karaoke. You consider your options. Pig? Too risky. Chicken? Too recent. You settle on cow. Safe, steady, universally recognized. You moo. It's not bad. It's not great. It's earnest. A solid, respectable moo with just a hint of confusion. You commit. You give it depth. You shift your weight. You chew invisible cud. You moo again, louder. The crowd moos back, unified and unsettling. It's a moment. You've created something communal, something bovine. Then the tavern doors swing open, and the goose arrives. It waddles out like it owns the building, the land, and your future. Its eyes are judgment incarnate. It pauses, assesses, and continues its slow, deliberate strut toward the stage. The crowd parts. A woman curtsies. The frog croaks nervously. The goose stops in front of you. It does not blink. It does not honk. It simply stares. You moo one more time, softer, like an apology or a challenge. The goose flares its wings slightly, then tucks them back in like you're not worth the energy. It turns. It waddles back into the tavern. It does not clap. The crowd is silent. Then someone coughs, and the tension breaks. The judge, now visibly sweating, raises a shaky hand and says, "Next?" But no one moves. The frog refuses to return to his original form. The honker sits down quietly and removes her feathers. The horseman is still face down in a wheelbarrow. The moment has passed. The goose has decided. You descend from the wagon with the strange, unsettling clarity of someone who has just met a higher power and been found lacking. A child offers you a carrot. You don't know what it means, but you take it. You walk away. Behind you, the tavern doors creak again. You do not turn around. The board is hand-carved and uneven, like it's been punched before. The pieces are heavy, worn, and sticky in a way that suggests this version of chess is more about stamina than strategy. You're seated on a crate that wobbles slightly every time someone breathes too hard. Your opponent is Brother Anselm, a monk with knuckles like theology and a backstory that includes former knight and once broke a man's nose for misquoting Aristotle. The rules are explained to you in a whisper, not for secrecy, but because the man explaining them is missing several teeth and possibly most of his confidence. Standard chess, mostly, but with one important twist. Every captured piece earns you a slap. You ask who delivers the slap. Brother Anselm cracks his knuckles and says, "Blessings are best when felt." The game begins. Your opening move is cautious, hesitant, bishop to c4, because you haven't yet committed to violence. Anselm responds with the grace of someone who knows exactly what he's doing and has no intention of going easy on a soul in borrowed boots. He captures your pawn. Without hesitation, he slaps you across the cheek. It is not aggressive. It is educational. The crowd, because of course there's a crowd, cheers like they've seen enlightenment in the form of face contact. A man sells breadsticks shaped like chess pieces. A child holds up a scorecard with a picture of a fist on it. You adjust your posture. Your next few moves are sharper. You start thinking less like a scholar and more like someone trying to dodge open palm theology. You sacrifice a knight for position and flinch before the hit even comes. It does. This time on the other cheek, a gentle reminder that pride is a sin and you're not great at this. Still, you push forward. You manage to capture his rook. There's a brief hush. The rules apply both ways, and for a moment, Brother Anselm bows his head in solemn anticipation. You raise your hand and deliver what can only be described as a suggestion of a slap. It's more of a polite nudge, like a mosquito asking for directions. The monk blinks once and resumes the game. You're fairly sure you've insulted him. The tempo picks up. Pieces vanish from the board, like dignity at a festival. Each one is followed by the sharp sound of contact and the increasingly enthusiastic gasps of the crowd. Your face feels like it's going through the stations of the cross. You lose your queen, your bishop, and your patience. At one point, a pigeon lands on your shoulder mid-slap and reconsiders its life. You finally move your rook into position. It's a trap. You know it. He knows it. The crowd starts chanting something in Latin that may or may not be encouragement. Brother Anselm grins, reaches for your knight, captures it, and slaps you hard enough to realign your worldview. Then you spring it. Your rook takes his queen. It's a beautiful move, elegant, devastating. The monk nods, closes his eyes, and waits. You hesitate. Your hand hovers. You think about justice, about redemption, about how much your cheek still stings, and then you slap him. The impact echoes like choir bells in a cathedral. He opens his eyes, smiles. Now it's a game. You lose 6 turns later. Your body hurts. Your ego is lumpy, and a tooth may have shifted locations. But the monk bows with reverence and offers you a sip from his flask, which tastes like honey and a little bit of blood. You accept it. You don't win, but for a moment, you understand something sacred. The board, the bruises, and the absolute holiness of a well-timed slap. The first time you hear it, you think it's a joke, a warm-up, a prelude to something more complex, maybe even profound. The bard plucks a string, clears his throat with the solemnity of a bishop about to curse, and begins. By the pond where the white swan weeps. It's not a bad melody. Gentle, haunting, even, in the way a lullaby becomes unsettling if you listen too long. You nod politely. He smiles like a man unveiling his life's masterpiece. The crowd leans in, as though hearing this for the first time, which is statistically impossible. He sings the verse again. Same words. Same pause before weeps, like the swan's emotional journey requires it. You glance at the person beside you. They're crying. You assume it's unrelated, until you see their lips mouthing along with every syllable. It's not just a song, it's a ritual. The second verse arrives, and it's the same verse. You blink. He adjusts his lute and adds a trill, like seasoning a soup that's already just water. Then he hits you with the twist. By the pond, where the second swan weeps. The crowd erupts. A man faints. A woman screams into her apron. The baker's boy collapses into a seated position, hands in his hair, whispering, "He did it. He finally did it." You stare in disbelief. The verse has changed by 1 numeral and nothing else. This is not a progression. This is a hostage situation. The bard bows. Then he starts again. The same chords, the same rhythm, the same tragic waterfowl, doomed to circle an emotional pond for eternity. This time, he closes his eyes as he sings, as though channeling the very essence of swandom. You don't know if it's poetic or unwell. You do know it's catchy. Hours pass, or maybe minutes. It's impossible to tell. Time is an illusion. Only swans are real. The village priest attempts to intervene, stepping forward with a polite cough and the gesture of someone preparing for an exorcism. The bard strums louder. The swans multiply. Verse after verse adds another grieving bird to the lineup. And now the pond is apparently so crowded it qualifies as a melancholy convention. Children begin drawing the swans in chalk. A woman names her baby Swanilda. Someone builds a small shrine using feathers and tears. You try to leave. Your legs betray you. You hum it. You hate yourself for it. But the melody loops in your mind like a cursed carousel. It follows you to the well, to the latrine. It stalks you through supper and haunts you at dusk. You close your eyes, and the lyrics float to the surface, white-feathered and smug. By the time night falls, you've accepted it. You sit beneath a tree, trying to remember your own name, and you hear it echoing from inside your own throat. A quiet little hum, involuntary and intimate, like a secret you didn't mean to keep. The bard, somewhere far off, plays the final verse of the night. By the pond, where the 100th swan weeps, a single tear rolls down your cheek. You wipe it away, but too late. The curse has settled in. You are now a part of this. You will never forget that song, and every pond from now on will feel just a little mournful. You're not sure how you got roped into this, but you're standing in a field, wearing a robe covered in sequins, holding a large cardboard key, and someone just shouted, "Let's get biblical," like it's the opening act of a morality rave. A goat walks by wearing a halo. You salute it. The event is technically a festival. The sign says, "Saintly Style," a celebration of holiness and hemlines, painted in glitter that seems to be actively migrating to your eyeballs. The rules are unclear. The crowd is enthusiastic, and someone's already been disqualified for setting their own sandals on fire in an attempt to become the light. You are St. Peter. Or rather, you are your best guess at St. Peter if he had access to rhinestones and questionable tailoring. Your robe sparkles in the sun like a holy disco ball. You've lost feeling in 1 foot from the sandals, which are constructed mostly out of rope, faith, and bad decisions. The competition is fierce. A man arrives in full Moses cosplay, holding 2 slate tablets that are either painted wood or very committed bread. He parts a crowd of chickens dramatically and screams, "Let my hens go." People cheer. Next is a woman dressed as the burning bush. She's wrapped in leaves, orange ribbons, and a constant cloud of smoke thanks to a strategically placed incense burner. She hisses whenever someone gets too close. A child asks if she grants wishes. She responds by quoting Leviticus and sneezing fire. A trio of villagers show up as the Holy Trinity. They are all named Greg and refuse to explain anything. One of them keeps spinning in a circle chanting mystery. And honestly, it's working. Then there's the priest. He isn't competing. He's just walking through, carrying a basket of figs and trying to get to the bake sale. But someone shouts, "Look at that commitment." And suddenly he's surrounded. People assume his simple robes are minimalist genius, that the fig basket is a symbol of divine bounty, that his visible confusion is part of the performance. He tries to protest, trips over a tambourine, lands in a pose so serene it gets painted by a local artist within minutes. By the time he stands, back up, a garland has been placed on his head, and someone is handing him a ribbon that says, "Most theologically accurate." The crowd erupts. The burning bush hurls a pine cone in protest. The goat bows. You approach the judging table, trying not to make eye contact with anyone in case they ask you to explain the sequence. The judge, a woman with a clipboard and the energy of a disappointed librarian, glances at your costume and raises an eyebrow. "St. Peter?" "Yes," you say with all the confidence of someone guessing the password to heaven. "Why the glitter?" You open your mouth. No words arrive. Only a single sparkle falls from your sleeve and lands between you both, like a tiny, shimmering confession. She writes something down. You don't ask what. At the end, the winners are announced. The priest takes first. Moses takes second. The burning bush gets a special award for flammable expression. You receive an honorable mention and a slightly melted candle shaped like a dove. As you leave the field, sequins trailing behind like sins you didn't mean to commit, someone claps you on the back and says, "You really captured the spirit." You nod, unsure if they mean holiness, confusion, or bedazzled delusion. Either way, you walk away glittering, unholy, but fabulous. The mud is colder than expected, not just in temperature, but in temperament. It clings to you like it's heard rumors and doesn't approve. You're still asking why, when a pair of hands hoists you into the pit with all the ceremony of a sack of barley being dumped for storage. There's no bell, no announcer. Just the guttural roar of villagers ready to watch two strangers fight for reasons no one remembers. Your opponent is introduced with a single word, Thumb. That's it. No surname, no explanation, just Thumb. He stands at the other end of the pit, flexing his shoulders in a way that suggests he hasn't blinked since the last lunar eclipse. He's shirtless, slick with what may or may not be leftover stew grease, and his beard moves independently of his face. You're not sure if it's from the wind or if it has sentience. Either way, it seems angry. Someone tosses a cabbage into the pit. You're not sure why. No one is. The rules are never explained, unless you count the man who shouted, "Anything but teeth," before vomiting in a boot. The crowd is a chaotic stew of cheering, betting, and one woman sobbing because she lost a coin toss and now owes her goat to a man named Hagar, the four-armed. Thumb charges. You dodge, barely, slipping in a puddle of something that smells like fermented oats and poor life choices. He skids past, arms windmilling, and face plants into the mud with the grace of a collapsing barn. There's a collective oof from the audience, followed by an enthusiastic, "Again." You scramble to your feet, which is generous phrasing. What actually happens is you flail upright using a bystander's extended broom and blind luck. Thumb rises too, slower this time, coated in mud and fury. You don't want to fight him. You'd prefer a conversation, or perhaps a polite retreat into a different village. One without traditions involving pits and strangers with unsettling nicknames. But the crowd has spoken. You lunge. He grabs your ankle. You go down like a sack of sins, elbowing a questionable clump of something that squelches in protest. Your face is inches from the mud. You smell onions. You don't know why. Thumb laughs. It's not a hearty laugh. It's more of a wheeze that implies his lungs are part bagpipe. He tries to roll on top of you, but you twist, squirm, and elbow your way into something resembling a defensive position that mostly involves yelling no and flailing. Then it happens. Thumb sneezes. Not a dainty, polite sneeze. A full-body, world-ending expulsion of force that echoes through the pit like a war horn made of snot and destiny. He freezes mid-motion, eyes wide, and then slumps backward into the mud with a squish so dramatic it could be scored with violins. You wait. He doesn't move. A pig oinks. Someone in the crowd shouts, "Victory!" and you're hoisted upward by two farmers who smell like pickled eggs and too much belief. You're paraded around the edge of the pit, arms raised like a champion, though you're mostly focused on not throwing up from the effort. Children chant your name, even though you're fairly sure they just made one up for you. It's Dirtface. You don't correct them. Thumb remains motionless, a proud sculpture of unconsciousness and misplaced bravado. A healer approaches and gives a thumbs up, which feels like too much. You're handed a wooden medallion that says "Champion" in crude paint and smells vaguely like horse. You accept it with as much grace as someone still dripping from the nostrils of a fallen man can manage. Later that night, lying on a pile of straw, your muscles aching and dignity unsure of its whereabouts, you hear the chant echoing from the village square. Dirtface, 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 and somehow you smile. You're not sure when the trial started. One moment, you're giggling at a duck who waddled directly into a bucket and emerged with the bucket still on its head like some kind of poultry knight. And the next, You're being dragged in front of a crowd by a man wearing a powdered wig made entirely of sheep, wool, and bad decisions. They say it's court. You say it's theater. Either way, you're the defendant, and the duck is glaring at you from the front row like it knows something you don't. The judge is introduced as Lord Sir Magistrate Puddingtail III, and he's also the village cooper, chimney sweep, and part-time flute instructor. He bangs a ladle against a breadboard and declares the court in session, spitting crumbs as he does. The audience hushes, except for one man who continues chewing aggressively on a turnip. Your crime? Unlawful, cackling in the presence of noble waterfowl. It's written on parchment in what appears to be beet juice. You open your mouth to protest, but your defense is cut short by a small child with wild hair and the energy of a cursed doll. She bursts forward dramatically and points at you like a tiny, furious prophet. That one laughed at Sir Quackers, she shrieks, eyes gleaming. Mocked his dignity, called him a soggy spoon. You never said the spoon part. At least, not out loud. Maybe you mumbled it. Maybe you were heard. It doesn't matter now. The prosecution, a woman with an eye patch and a squirrel on her shoulder, paces in front of you like she's starring in a traveling morality play. This town has standards, she says, gesturing at nothing in particular. We have honor. We have decency. We have ducks. The crowd nods solemnly. Someone sighs. The squirrel claps. You glance at the jury. 3 chickens and a goat. 1 chicken is asleep. 1 is pecking something off the goat's back. The 3rd is staring at you with what might be judgment or might be indigestion. The goat blinks slowly, then sneezes. The prosecution calls her next witness, a man who once arm wrestled himself in public and lost. He claims you've shown a pattern of disrespect toward animals of stature. That last week you mocked a toad in a hat. You remember the toad. The hat was impressive, the toad less so. Someone in the crowd throws a cabbage leaf in your direction. You attempt a defense. You stand up, brush the imaginary dust from your tunic, and explain that it was a reflex laugh. Not malicious, not targeted. Just the natural reaction of a person seeing a duck act like an idiot. A gasp. The judge drops his ladle. You realize too late that you've said the forbidden word again. Duck and idiot. Together, in court. The chickens cluck in outrage. The goat snorts. The verdict arrives within seconds. The parchment is stamped with a muddy hoofprint and a red X. You are declared guilty of mockery, insolence, and after a brief sidebar foot odor. Your sentence? Public apology to Sir Quackers and mandatory attendance at Respecting Nobility, a duck awareness seminar, hosted by the child who testified against you. She grins like a warlord receiving tribute. You're escorted to the duck, who is now wearing a small cape and eating breadcrumbs from a silver dish. You bow, trying not to make eye contact. You whisper your apology, low and humble. The duck quacks. The crowd cheers. The judge bangs the ladle one final time and declares the justice system flawless. As you leave the courtroom, a repurposed goat pen with dreams of grandeur, you catch your reflection in a puddle. You look like someone who has learned something. You're just not sure what. Probably to never laugh at a duck again, not where they can see. The first note strikes like a slap, not a friendly slap, but the kind with rings on. 2 bards stand 10 feet apart, each clutching a lute like it's a weapon passed down through generations of musical drama. The crowd circles them like wolves around a campfire, equal parts anticipation and fear. You're handed a chunk of bread and told, "This will make sense later." You don't ask. The duel begins with flair. 1 bard, a wiry man with a mustache that curls like sinister punctuation, opens with a melody so sharp it might actually cut. His lyrics are precise, insults wrapped in rhyme. He calls the other bard a turnip-headed fool with the charm of a wet eel. The crowd gasps. Someone drops a tankard. The second bard, taller, dressed in a cloak stitched entirely from old curtain fabric, responds with a tragic ballad about the first bard's haircut, his mother's goat, and an embarrassing incident involving soup and betrayal. There are multiple key changes. A child begins to cry, not from sadness, just confusion. You didn't know insults could be harmonized, but here you are. The duel escalates quickly. It becomes less of a song battle and more of an opera of emotional warfare. Each verse digs deeper, dragging out childhood traumas, failed romances, and the questionable hygiene of both participants. At one point, Bard Hashon rhymes filthy liar with expired mire, quagmire, and you're fairly certain that's not a real phrase, but it still hurts. Then someone faints, not from injury, from sheer dramatic weight. They go down like a sack of onions, clutching their heart, mouthing the words such poetry as they collapse. The bards don't stop. In fact, they seem invigorated. Bard Hash-2 kneels on one knee and launches into a falsetto, so piercing it makes a baby hiccup nearby. You feel your spine vibrate. Someone proposes marriage. It's unclear to whom. Possibly the bread. Emotions are running high. You take a step back, then another. No one notices. All eyes are locked on the performance, which has now entered a minor key and incorporated props. Bard Hashon has produced a tambourine and is using it to emphasize a chorus about the scent of cowardice and cabbage. Bard Hash-2 is crying but singing louder, daring his opponent to cross a line no one can see. The bread in your hand feels heavier. You glance around. There's a wheelbarrow unattended by the cider stall. A sheep is sleeping beside it. You feel the pull of freedom. You leave, quietly, respectfully, bread still in hand, dignity barely intact. As you walk away, the sounds of the duel fade behind you. At first, it's just muffled rhymes and the occasional dramatic strum. Then silence. Then a scream. Then what might be bagpipes. You don't look back. You find a spot beneath an oak tree, sit down, and take a bite of the bread. It's stale, but honest. A man runs past you a minute later, shirtless, covered in glitter, and singing about betrayal in C minor. You pretend not to see him. Later that night, someone tells you the duel ended in a draw. Both bards wept. One stole a loaf of bread. No one knows why. You just nod, chewing slowly. You were never really part of the song duel. You were simply collateral. The pie stares back at you. Not literally, there are no eyes in it. You hope, but in that way certain foods do when they shouldn't be warm, and yet they are. You're handed a slice by a woman wearing 12 aprons and a look that says she's seen things, and you accept it like a fool accepts a quest scroll labeled, "Do not open." The crust gives a faint squelch when your fingers press into it. It smells like basil, or maybe despair. The line is blurry. Around you, others chew nervously, eyes darting like prey animals waiting for someone else to collapse first. One man is sweating. One woman has tears running down her cheeks, though whether from joy, pain, or pepper is up for debate. No one is talking. They're just eating. You break off a piece and take a bite. It hums, not metaphorically, audibly. The slice in your hand lets out a low, vibrating trill like a sleepy bee inside a violin. You freeze. Everyone else freezes. A chicken outside the window crows and immediately regrets it. The sound echoes. You chew once, twice. The flavor is moving, not emotionally, physically. Across your tongue in waves, like it's trying to get somewhere. You detect notes of onion, honey, possibly ink. Something crackles, and for a brief second you taste time. Then it's gone. Everyone gasps. A man in the back yells, "We have a leader!" You blink. You were unaware there was a scoreboard. A small boy holding a wooden plank with tally marks raises his thumb. An old woman throws confetti made of shredded cabbage. You're in first place. You didn't even want to play. Next to you, a woman eats another bite of her pie and lets out a small scream that seems unrelated to physical injury. Her eyes widen. "Parsley," she whispers in horror. The pie lady leans in and grins. "Round two?" she purrs. Before you can answer, another tray appears. This one is purple, not the filling, the crust, and not a regal eggplant purple, more like bruise. It steams. You can't tell if the aroma is fruity or fungal. A man with 3 teeth and a harp begins playing dramatic chords in the background. The room grows quiet. You take another bite. It's wet, unreasonably so. The crust dissolves before your tongue can ask questions. The filling tastes like something that had a name once but chose to forget it. Your nose tingles. Your left ear pops. Someone applauds. Your name, well, not your real name, but the nickname Crustmaster you didn't approve, gets chanted quietly at first, then louder. Crustmaster, Crustmaster, Crustmaster. You rise slightly from your stool, not in pride, but because the pie seems to be buoyant. You glance around the room. No one looks sane anymore. One man is dancing with his pie like it's a long-lost lover. Another is weeping into a napkin and muttering, "She said it was lamb, but I know goat when I taste it." The judge, who may or may not also be the village dentist, approaches. He takes your plate, sniffs it, then dabs a crumb on his tongue like he's deciphering ancient scrolls. "Remarkable," he says, before nodding solemnly and scribbling something on a piece of bark. You win. You don't know what you've won. Possibly a coupon, possibly a curse. The crowd erupts in cheers and pie fragments. You're given a ceremonial ladle. It's still sticky. Later, alone and nauseous under a tree, you hear rustling. A squirrel approaches cautiously, then sniffs your breath and runs. You burp. The sound harmonizes. You decide not to ask what was in the pie. You don't think you'd like the answer. The rope creaks above you. That's your first concern. Your second is that someone's humming a lullaby in minor key. And your third is that you're being lowered slowly, deliberately, into a pit carved out of pure nonsense and questionable intent. It smells like dust, feet, and dried herbs that never had a purpose. The sides of the pit are lined with spectators eating turnips like popcorn, eyes gleaming with anticipation. One man has a chalkboard. Another is wearing a monocle made from a bottle cap. When your feet touch the ground, it's soft. Not plush, more like how moss feels after something's died on it. From the shadows, a figure steps forward. She's ancient, robed in tattered curtains, and holding a feather longer than your forearm. Her grin is wide, toothless, and far too pleased. "Riddle me, Wriggler," she hisses, and you're unsure if that's a greeting or a threat. She begins. "What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 7 during Lent, if Jeffries had cider?" You blink. You open your mouth. You close it. "Is it a confused goat?" You offer. She gasps. The crowd gasps. A pig somewhere oinks in judgment. "Wrong," she shrieks and lunges. The feather strikes your ribs like divine punishment. It's not soft. It's possessed. You lurch sideways, trying not to scream, but your body betrays you. Laughter explodes out of your lungs like steam from a medieval kettle. The crowd cheers. Someone throws a radish in celebration. The old woman giggles like a child who's just knocked over a tower and discovered chaos. "Next," she howls. What has hands but no fingers except on Wednesdays when the moon is shy? You want to ask for clarification. You want a lawyer. You want to be anywhere else. But all you get is a second riddle and the looming threat of that feather. A clock? You guess? She tilts her head. There's a pause. A man in the crowd drops a beat. Then, close enough. You exhale. Unless it's a Thursday, she adds. Then it's Gerald. You do not ask who Gerald is. She circles now, slow as fog. Her feet make no sound. You're not sure she has feet. Another riddle is whispered, and it slides into your ear like an eel, dipped in confusion. What's full of holes but always empty, unless it's borrowed by a duck named Charles? You've reached the point of surrender. Your answer is simple. Yes. She nods solemnly, as if you've just passed a sacred trial, then tickles your neck anyway. Your screams reach a new octave. From above, someone takes notes. You suspect it's for a scholarly paper titled Laughter as a Weapon, Feather-Based Interrogation in Local Folk Traditions. Eventually, mercifully, the rope descends again. You cling to it like it's a childhood memory and are hoisted upward, your dignity somewhere in the mud below. As your head clears the pit, applause erupts. Children point. A bard strums a victorious chord. You're handed a prize. It's a feather, still warm. No one explains why. You are told not to move. That's it. That's the game. A bearded man with a staff, not a wizard, just a carpenter with drama, lays out the rules with intense seriousness, like he's launching a naval invasion. Stillness, he says. True stillness. No blinking, no twitching, no digestion if you can help it. You're seated on a barrel. Others are perched on hay bales, stones. One very unfortunate man is balanced on a goat that does not seem thrilled about it. A bell rings somewhere off in the distance, and everyone immediately stiffens like they're auditioning for a statue gig outside the royal palace. You follow suit. 5 seconds in, someone sneezes. They're dragged away in shame. A child throws a handful of grain in their general direction. The grain is unrelated but symbolic. You settle your breathing. You lock your eyes on a distant tree. You wonder briefly if this is enlightenment or early onset madness. The woman next to you hasn't blinked. You're fairly certain she's not breathing either. She might be winning or already ascended. Hard to say. Time stretches. Somewhere, a rooster crows twice. The sun shifts. A beetle crawls across your foot and has the gall to make eye contact. You remain still. You are the wind. No, you are not even that. You are a rock. A majestic, sweaty rock. That's when the sheep screams. You didn't know sheep could scream. This one sounds like it's being informed of its tax bracket. Everyone flinches. Everyone except one man. He rises slowly, dramatically, finger outstretched toward the sheep, and shouts, "Witchcraft!" The crowd, which moments ago was engaged in competitive stillness, erupts into chaos. The goat throws off its passenger. A bale of hay is weaponized. Someone shouts, "To the river," as though that clarifies anything. You duck as a stool flies past your head and lands squarely in a bowl of soup. The sheep bolts. You didn't even know there was a sheep involved, but here it is, sprinting across the square like it's been cast in a play it didn't audition for. A group of children gives chase, chanting something about justice. The bearded man tries to maintain order by whistling through his teeth, which, it turns out, just attracts more goats. You think about staying still, about rising above, about being the true winner. Then a boy smacks you with a carrot and declares you cursed by movement. And just like that, you're in it too. You run. You don't know why. Possibly from shame, possibly from the fact that the woman who hadn't blinked is now sprinting directly at you with a ladle and suspicious energy. She's faster than she looks. She may have been lying still for 7 minutes, but now she's got the stride of someone who's hunted professionally. Eventually, the chase disperses. Someone claims the sheep turned invisible. Someone else swears they saw it levitate. There's an impromptu debate about what qualifies as sorcery versus just weird livestock. You are declared the winner of the stillness contest, not because you were still the longest, but because no one else remembers why they were running. You're given a sash that says, "Champion of Peace," and a jar of pickled onions. The sheep, now mysteriously wearing a crown, watches from a distance. It blinks. Once, slowly, judgmentally. You bow, out of respect, or maybe just exhaustion. You're handed a quill, a piece of parchment that smells faintly of damp cellar, and a turnip. The turnip stares at you, not literally, but it has that quiet, accusing presence, like it's seen things. You're seated on a stump next to a boy, writing feverishly to a rutabaga, cheeks flushed, eyes wild with passion. Across from you, an older woman dabs her eyes with her sleeve and murmurs tender lines to a zucchini she cradles like a newborn. Somewhere in the background, a lute plays a single, mournful chord on loop. It feels both romantic and unhinged. A man in a velvet hat with too many feathers clears his throat and declares this the 9th annual festival of agricultural affection. "Let your hearts open," he cries. "Let the vegetables hear your yearning." He says this like he's proposing a toast or launching a ship, and no one questions it. You look at the turnip in your hand. It's lumpy, stubborn, covered in a thin sheen of dirt. You feel judged. Still, you begin. The first line is stiff. Something about resilience, about roots buried deep, about tubers with secrets. You wince. The turnip doesn't react. You continue, finding a strange rhythm. You compare it to the moon, round, pale, mysterious. You say it's the only thing that's never lied to you. You whisper about the silence between harvests, the way time forgets all things except the taste of longing and mashed root vegetables. You're not sure if it's poetry or a cry for help, but your voice shakes anyway. Across the circle, a teenage girl collapses dramatically onto the grass after declaring her eternal devotion to a squash named Barry. Two men duel with leek stalks over a poetic misunderstanding. A judge deducts points because someone rhymed potato with desperado and then tried to pass it off as regional dialect. The air smells of compost, passion, and lightly fried onions. Your turnip remains silent. Then, it's time to present. You step forward, parchment in one hand, turnip in the other. People quiet. The lute plucks a gentler note. You clear your throat and read, your voice cracking only once, twice, if anyone's being honest. Your sonnet speaks of loyalty, of soil-stained devotion, of love that sprouts where no one looks. When you finish, there's a pause, then applause, then a sheep bleats, which you choose to take as encouragement. The turnip is lifted from your hands by the man in the feather hat. He raises it above his head like it's the newborn prince of the realm. People cheer. You're patted on the back. Someone calls you a bard of the barnyard. You're handed a ribbon that says, "Most earnest." You're not sure if it's an insult or the highest honor here. As you sit back down, overwhelmed by emotion and turnip-based acclaim, a man in a green cloak appears beside you. You don't remember seeing him earlier. He smells faintly of cinnamon and regret. He leans in, eyes glassy, and whispers, "I once loved a beet." Then, without explanation, he walks into the mist. Not just fog, actual mist that seems to have waited for that exact moment to roll in. He vanishes like a subplot. You stare after him, unsure if you've witnessed a ghost, a metaphor, or a man with impeccable timing. The turnip is returned to you, now adorned with a tiny flower crown. You cradle it awkwardly. It's heavier than before, emotionally. A bell chimes and the crowd disperses. You hear murmurs about next year's theme, radishes of desire. Someone asks if emotional attachment to legumes is frowned upon. No one answers. You walk away slowly, your ribbon fluttering, your turnip in hand, humming a line from your own poem without meaning to. It lingers in your head like a melody from a dream you don't fully understand. And maybe, just maybe, the turnip hums back. It starts with a hum, low, offbeat, like the sound of 100 people trying to remember the same song at different times. The sun has gone down, but the air still tastes like roasted barley and smoke. You're seated on the edge of a splintering bench, your clothes crusted with the residue of too much joy and too little hygiene. The festival has been going on for what feels like an entire era, and you're fairly certain you've aged a decade since morning. Around you, the crowd gathers, holding stubby candles, some already half melted into their fingers, dripping wax and devotion in equal measure. A man in robes steps onto the makeshift stage, a cart with one wheel missing, and declares the closing ceremony begun. The crowd cheers weakly, The fire crackles. A child shouts something about bread. The man raises a hand and begins to sing, his voice confident, his pitch legally distinct from music. Others join in. It's beautiful in the way thunderstorms are beautiful, chaotic, loud, and possibly dangerous. Beside you, an old woman sways, her candle flickering dangerously close to her hair. She doesn't notice. You consider moving it, then decide if she's survived this long, she's earned the right to ignite on her own terms. Then the boy arrives, the juggler. He's maybe 12, barefoot, eyes alight, with the kind of confidence that should be illegal at his age. He starts with 3 knives. People clap politely, then 4. The crowd perks up. By the time he's at 6, the air is a blur of steel and candlelight. Someone shouts, "For glory," and he grins like he's just met it in person. 1 knife slips, grazes a barrel, and embeds itself in a loaf of bread that had no business being there. People cheer louder. A group of monks begins a chant, deep and rolling, and the rhythm builds beneath the sound of the boy's knives slicing air. Drums join in badly. Someone starts, clapping off beat, but in such a committed way that the crowd follows. The entire ceremony now pulses like a living, slightly tipsy creature. Then, the goat appears. You don't know where it comes from. One moment there's rhythm and chaos and a vague smell of beer, and the next, there's a goat at the center of it all, standing proud and illuminated by the firelight. It has a wreath of ivy around its neck, and the calm, haunted stare of someone who knows this isn't their first cult meeting. People part reverently. The goat looks around, then at the pile of torches set up nearby, and then, in perfect silence, it raises 1 hoof and kicks a torch over. The torch catches flame instantly, roaring to life. The crowd gasps, then cheers, because apparently this was the plan all along. The boy bows. The monks chant louder. The fire crackles and dances higher, painting everything gold and red. For one brief, unsettlingly transcendent moment, the entire village seems united in awe of a goat with a questionable sense of pyrotechnics. You watch as people begin to toss things into the flames. Flowers, scraps of parchment, one extremely brave man's boot. A woman tosses what looks like a wig. A baker throws in an entire pie. The fire hisses in approval, eating everything, glowing brighter. You feel it on your skin, warmth and exhaustion blending into something that almost feels holy. The man in robes reappears and raises his arms for silence. He delivers a closing speech about community, tradition, and how this year's turnout was only slightly less disastrous than last year's. The crowd applauds, like they've just witnessed divine revelation. He bows deeply, steps off the stage, and immediately trips into a barrel of ale. No one helps him. It's tradition. The candles begin to gutter. One by one, people drift away, humming fragments of the song that never quite stayed in tune. The air is thick with smoke and laughter. The juggler is showing off again, now tossing 3 spoons and a turnip. The goat stands near the ashes, chewing something that might once have been a ribbon. You sit there, too tired to move, watching the last of the fire fade into glowing embers. The crowd thins until it's just you, the goat, and the faint echo of the monks, finishing their chant somewhere in the distance. The world feels slower, softer, somehow less ridiculous and yet perfectly content in its absurdity. The goat looks at you, flicks an ear, and exhales like a creature who's seen enough of humanity for one lifetime. You nod. Then, together, you watch the fire burn out. You wake to the sound of chickens arguing, not clucking arguing. There's real tension in the air, like someone lost a bet. You open one eye and see sunlight spilling through a thatched roof that looks like it's losing a slow, noble battle against gravity. You're lying on a straw mattress that has opinions about your spine. A boot not yours is nestled under your arm like a sleeping pet. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays what could generously be described as music, though it sounds more like a squirrel auditioning for panic. You sit up slowly, Your clothes are stiff, speckled with mud, glitter, and what you hope is pie. There's hay in your hair, and a faint smell of smoke clinging to your skin, the ghost of last night's fire still lingering. You find a ladle on the floor beside you, engraved with the words, "Champion of Stillness," and for a long moment you can't tell if it's a trophy or a warning. A rooster hops onto your windowsill and stares you down like it knows things. You stare back. Neither of you wins. Outside, the village hums awake. Someone is laughing. Someone else is definitely crying. A bell rings, not because it's time for anything specific, but because someone has access to a bell and poor impulse control. You step into the street, blinking in the bright morning, greeted by the sight of 3 men asleep in a fountain and 1 woman serenading a cabbage like it's her long-lost love. The air smells of bread and wet dirt and redemption. You pass the jester, or rather, your jester. He's wearing 1 shoe and a look of triumph, juggling something that may once have been fruit. He waves. You wave back, cautiously, trying to remember if marriage by festival chant is legally binding. He bows, then walks into a wall. Somehow, that feels like closure. Everywhere you look, the aftermath of celebration hangs in the air, half-eaten pies, ribbons fluttering from trees, a single shoe hanging from the maypole like a forgotten prayer. Children chase a goat wearing a crown made of turnips. The goat looks proud. The children look terrified. Balance, you think, is restored. You wander toward the field where it all began. The mud pit is quiet now, its surface smooth and deceptive, hiding the screams of yesterday's competitors. A banner flaps lazily in the breeze, declaring "Festival of Joy and Questionable Choices" in uneven lettering. A bird lands on it and immediately poops. Fitting. There's something peaceful about it, though the aftermath. The echo of laughter still caught in the air, the faint memory of absurdity stitched into every corner of the place. You can almost hear the shouts, the songs, the chaos. You can almost feel the pulse of it still moving under your skin. For the first time in a long time, you don't mind not understanding what's happening around you. An old woman approaches, her arms full of bread. She squints up at you, mutters something about good soup bones, and hands you a loaf before wandering off again. It's the best breakfast you've ever had. Crumbly, smoky, slightly alive. You eat it while watching the villagers rebuild stalls, argue about rules no one followed, and laugh over bruises earned in good faith. You think about leaving, about returning to a place where things make sense, and people don't compete in emotional poetry for vegetables. But as the morning light filters through the smoke and dust, painting everything in soft gold, you realize something terrible and true. You'd do it all again. The pies, the goats, the fire, the mud, the laughter that made your ribs ache, the nonsense, the warmth, the way every absurd moment felt like life refusing to take itself too seriously. You'd walk right back into it, tambourine in hand, ready to dance for reasons no one can explain. The jester reappears, holding a mug of something steaming. "Breakfast ale," he says proudly, as if that's a normal sentence. You take it, you sip. It's terrible. You grin anyway, because somehow, in this wild and foolish village, surrounded by laughter and dirt and people who celebrate simply being alive, terrible tastes just mean you're still part of it. The rooster crows again. The jester sneezes into his hat. Someone starts playing the lute off-key. And as the sun climbs over the roofs, warming your face in the still damp fields, you realize that even if you tried to forget this place, it would live in you anyway, bright, strange, and completely, impossibly alive.